Hey everybody, Alex Miller at Capnion here. In this video, I'm going to make good on my promise of last week to start talking about open source large language models. I'm going to look at a particular example in a minute, but first I'm going to talk very generally about a number of things. Why is this a hard topic? Why am I starting out talking about a particular random example? What are the ins and outs of that this is actually a pretty complicated area? So, as somebody who's on LinkedIn all day, you can see people, maybe understandably, would like to have their own large language model. And I think it's worth saying this is hard. This is hard. Well, why would you want to do this hard thing? You've probably seen in my other videos, there's a lot of different risks. If you're doing everything through OpenAI, it's very accessible on the web, that's great. They've already had a data breach. They get sued all the time. Maybe you don't want to be in business with them and pick up the second order risk from all those things. I don't know that the other options are that great. And if there's a lane, it really is around these open source models, I think, and I'll get into that in a second. So just to start square zero, you want to have your own LLM for some reason at your big corporation. You have this continuum of options. You could refine ChatGPT. I already explained what was kind of iffy about that. You could try to build your own thing totally from scratch, reading academic papers and that kind of thing. I could do videos upon videos why the totally from scratch thing is going to be a real nightmare for you. Very difficult and a lot of lift to replicate. And this will also be a little bit evident in my open source example. The middle road is these open source models. Maybe they've already had a lot of training, so they already mostly work, and you're in the phase where you're just refining it using your data. It's a good and a bad thing. There's a zillion. So you can maybe probably find one that suits whatever your particular hangups are, but then the other side of the sword, and this is something I'm grappling with right now, and I'm trying to protect you from this pain to some degree. Well, it's easy to find a billion articles about 10 billion different open source LLMs right now. And then there's a lot of fog to cut through about, well, what is the right one? Lots are based on this model that I guess Meta released called Llama. It's a jungle out there. So how do you pick one? What are the ins and outs? It's worth noting the performance of these open source models is not as good as some of the marquee OpenAI, Google models, for example. I think it's particularly important to note that the very broad and flexible capability of ChatGPT is going to be the hardest thing for you to replicate because that requires a very massive and broad training data set. I think there's a crazy fistfight going on now about how you get and curate that data. And if you're trying to play in that game, I think you could easily sleep on what kind of cost and complexity you are getting yourself into. So I hope I'm stating the obvious here when I say that it's pretty important what you want the thing to do and what you need it to be good at. And in particular, there's a spectrum of help desk and enterprise search-like applications where you're going to refine the large language model by letting it read a bunch of documents that you have about what goes on at your corporation or similar, and it's going to answer those questions for people. The open source LLMs seem to be quite suitable for this, and you could have a good time, but you should not expect to be able to get the kind of ask about anything in reality functionality without a lot of extra investment. So what are you going to use it for? The performance question is not even one-dimensional. All right, so I'll put a link below this video. I'm going to talk about an offering I observed from Mosaic ML. This is a company, they make a training platform for these things. Databricks is working with them, they're a pretty prominent company. A lot of people are working with to handle their data right now, so that looks like a pretty nice endorsement. But to some degree, I just picked some example out of the fog to talk to you about. They have an open source offering that they tout pretty heavily. They compare the performance favorably with these other open source models, which is once again not as good. They give as an advertisement that they trained their most recent open source model at a cost of $200,000 on their platform in 9.5 days. And this is a great set of numbers to break down, I think. The average make a corporate budget has more than $200,000 for cupcakes in it, probably. So I don't want to say, like, oh, no, that's too expensive. No one could ever do that. But that's not chump change at all. And I think it's worthwhile to contextualize. No one posts on LinkedIn when their just regular machine learning project goes south, unless it's to give some kind of enlightened meta-analysis of why other people's machine learning project goes south. If you're going to train something for 9.5 days at a cost of $200,000, you really need to know what you're doing the first time. And in the traditional machine learning world, you might be able, and if you are able and you have the expertise, you should be doing it. You really want a script training a lot of models with varying parameters and looking at how they change statistically. And this is really often an important part of the story of getting to the right place of something that's useful and that you know is useful. And you're not going to be playing that game at $200,000 a pop. So it's important to know what you're doing, and a lot of us are, excited about generative AI. Probably some of you out there, let's be real, don't know what you're doing. You should think about that $200,000 price tag. Also, in this case, being presented as a selling feature. Isn't it great that it was only $200,000? So they also mention that this used 440 GPUs. A GPU is a specialized processor. They're actually invented for graphics, and it's a whole fascinating other area how we got here. But you need these specialized processors to get reasonable performance training a lot of these artificial intelligence algorithms. So this is to say, like, the more you are trying to do things totally in-house, the more you are looking at specialized hardware requirements that present additional cost. On the flip side, Mosaic is offering you a platform to do these things, and they're going to take some of that complexity away from you, and that's nice. But then you're back in the same box where maybe now you're sending data to Mosaic, and you pick up different kinds of risk from Mosaic. And I haven't thought about in quite the detail I presented about OpenAI in some of my other videos, but you're not all the way escaping from the problems that made you nervous about OpenAI if you're doing things that way. Let's summarize all of this. There's a lot of decisions here taking this road, which I think is really the only viable road for having your own pet LLM right now. You really need to make them right. And in various ways, it's all very expensive. So if you don't know what you're doing, and people often convince themselves they know what they're doing when they don't, there's potential for things to get very, very expensive. And then at the end, if you're going the open source road, you're already not competitive with what people were playing with on their phone, if you do it right. And if you do it wrong, you could spend a lot of money not really producing any value. I live in real life, so I know that in addition to using these for hard business value, people might want to do something with LLM for prestige, or to set a foundation to do something later, or to appear attractive to talent. And yeah, I think for those kinds of things, if you've got the money, great. But if you're just looking to get the functionality together, you should be wary that you are really picking up a heavy lift and be prepared to manage risk around that and be sure it's really what you want to do.